Good afternoon, and welcome to the Kentucky edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Here's the agenda for our hour together, and before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone's been muted, no need to do that for yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You see a little orange arrow at the top of that panel. That allows the panel to shrink and reopen. And you see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side. That decouples it, enabling you to write in a question or comment. We will make time for some questions and get some thoughts from all of you toward the latter half of the webinar. When we're going through the maps on the web app, if that control panel is in the way, just click that little orange arrow and it will move that control panel over. I just want to mention on the control panel, you'll also see handouts. We've put two handouts in the website in there. One is the full Farms Under Threat 2040 report, and the second is a very useful Kentucky state summary. We're going to talk through that in a little bit. So let me now introduce myself. I'm Chris Coffin. I direct AFT's National Agricultural Land Network, which is an information and peer learning network for professionals and citizen advocates working to save farm and ranch land around the country. I'm also AFT's Senior Policy Advisor with a specialty on farmland protection, land access, and farm viability. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Director of Special Program Development and Senior Policy Advisor. Billy is also a licensed landscape architect. Billy has been working on land use and farmland protection in Kentucky for over 25 years. We're thrilled that he is joining us. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me just take a minute to talk about us. We're a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some of you may know us best by our iconic No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We take a holistic approach to agriculture. Our national initiatives and regional programs focus not just on protecting the land base, but also on the practices used on the land and on the farmers and ranchers who work the land now and in the future. As another one of our bumper stickers says, it's not farmland without farmers. Our programs and our research together inform our federal and state policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and our headquarters are in Washington, D.C. So with that, let me turn it over to Billy, who is also going to introduce our special guest.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for joining us. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been an integral partner on this research, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we had a second research partner in the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And now I would like to welcome a very special guest, Keith Rogers, who serves as Chief of Staff for the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Thank you so much for joining us, Keith. You've had a chance to review the summary findings from the report, and I have just a few questions. What struck you most about the findings?
Well, thank you, Billy. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this afternoon on behalf of Commissioner Ryan Quarles and the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. We appreciate this opportunity, and we appreciate all the work that the American Farmland Trust has done. You know, what I see in the report, and I have followed American Farmland Trust personally for years, being actually appointed to the first PACE board in Kentucky many years ago. preserving farmland has always been something that I have been very interested in, but I see the trends continue. The trends of large lot development continue. I see the trends that we're going to continue to lose agricultural, prime agricultural land. And there's many reasons for that I think we'll see today. I think we've made a lot of headway in the last several decades, though, in educating the general public and especially our policymakers around the need to preserve our prime farmland and policies and opportunities, initiatives that can do that. And very thankful for the American Farmland Trust for being the leader across the nation in doing that.
Well, thank you, Keith. And as you have been involved for many, many years with American Farmland Trust. In fact, you hosted a press conference for us when we were releasing the first phase of this research. And thank you for your continued partnership. My next question is, how do you think this research can be used by the folks on this webinar to help save farmland and ranch land? So, you know, the folks that are involved in farmland protection across the state, be it farmers or extension agents or planners or members of a fiscal court, how do you think this research can be used by those folks to help save farmland?
Well, I think it's the facts and the information. One of the things that we have to do in agriculture is educate the general public. It's an ongoing, constant thing that we have to do. And it's the same thing here in protecting prime farmland. We'll never get, I've said this many times, we'll never get done educating the general public about where their food comes from. We'll never get done in educating the general public about the importance of protecting our prime farmland. And that we have growth, but we have growth in a way that benefits our general population, you know. And those are the things I think that most come out of the work that you all do, and particularly out of this report, is informing the public and helping to keep this issue in front of the public. You know, oftentimes we see a large manufacturing development come into a community or a county. And you see a rise in the interest of protecting farmland and maybe not that development coming there for various reasons, just not protecting farmland. It happens and then it kind of goes away and we forget about it. And we don't go back and think about what the long-term effect of that was and what happens next, especially if a facility or something like that comes in and consumes a large amount. Because the additional growth, the additional sprawl that you can have out of that opportunity can go on for decades. And that's what I think is critical here with this study and what we've learned over the last many decades of the work of the American Farmland Trust is the tools, the policy tools, the programs, the funding, the mechanisms that have been developed over the last couple of years, the work that you all do to keep that in front of our policymakers, the decision makers, in helping to educate the general public and those folks about the ways that they can move and to make those decisions better for agriculture.
Thank you, Keith. And that's a perfect segue for my next question. You and I worked together for many years on farmland protection there in central Kentucky, but you work across the state every day. And you interact with state officials and local governments across the entire state. We had a lot of momentum on the state PACE program when we launched, and which led to the launching Lexington Fayette County's Purchase of Development Rights program. We have a very active and successful private land trust and Bluegrass Land Conservancy, which has a 24 county service area in the inner and outer bluegrass regions. But what would you like to see, Keith, if you just had, you could, by the wave of a pen, so to speak, what would you like to see state or local governments or even the federal government do to reduce the conversion of farmland and keep that momentum going?
Well, I think the one thing that we can do to help slow down or potentially even reverse that is to make agriculture profitable. You know, in so many cases, we're looking at the reason that farmland gets changed to something else is because of that profitability. because the farmer is either retiring or sees an opportunity to so-called cash out of his lifetime or life works and earnings that's put into that land. So keeping agriculture profitable, of course, is number one, and that takes all of us at every level, federal government, state government, local level, of course, in doing so. We're always going to face that challenge with cycles and drought and prices and everything else. But the one thing that I think we can do is create incentives, and that's the most important program, whether it's a federal program or state, is to create those incentives, create those opportunities for somebody that maybe is on the bubble or on the edge of deciding whether to develop the farm or sell the farm or whatever else, to give them an opportunity to do something else. Of course, one, that's always an easy cash way. You know, we had legislation introduced in Kentucky in this past session that through a solar bill that could have basically put in a fee on solar development that could have come back to the PACE program and helped us fund a program that's not had a real true source of funding since its very beginning, a dedicated source of funding, maybe I should say. We had that opportunity. So funding is one avenue. Young farmer programs, helping landlords make that migration if they don't have an heir or don't have a son or a grandson or a granddaughter who wants to come back into farming. It's setting up a program that alleviates some of the transfer pressure, maybe some of the transfer taxes on that young person being able to come into farm, whether it's leasing the farm or buying the farm. You know, Kentucky has helped set up a program in that direction in the last few years. So, you know, we don't want to rule by stick. We don't want to rule that, you know, you can't do it. We don't want to put land use planning positions or policies in place that just basically restrict it. But we want to incentivize agriculture so that they know that there's options other than just cashing out at the end of that farming career and taking the money and moving on.
Thank you, Keith. We appreciate your valuable feedback. Now I'd like to turn it over to my colleague, Chris Coffin.
Great. Thank you, Billy. And thank you so much for joining us, Keith. We really appreciate that and commend you for all the department has been doing. So now we're going to dive into the methodology and findings from the report. So unlike the last two Farms Under Threat reports, the first one that focused on nationally the amount of nationally significant agricultural land and the loss of 11 million acres of that land, and the second one that looked at state level agricultural land conversion. So these two were looking at past and documenting past land conversion. This report predicts future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. How do we do this? We started with our Farms Under Threat State of the States data and our analysis of ag land conversion from 2001 to 2016. As a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different land types, urban and high density development, or UHD, and low density residential development, or LDR. So let's talk about those two things for just a minute. UHD is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion that people have mapped and tracked for many years. So it's expanding residential areas, industrial areas, commercial areas. It's largely found in and around cities and towns, but it is also including rural industrial sites such as oil, gas, and solar development. Basically anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as paved over and built up. So LDR, low density residential development, has become a larger culprit, as Keith mentioned, about large lot housing. And AFT and our science partners pioneered an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this large lot housing on the agricultural land base in state of the states. We found that LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses and farmettes, ranchettes are being built. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms that remain. We do know that some LDR allows for some farming, but it tends to be less commercial. And we do know that once land has been converted to LDR, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land use. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with a business as usual scenario. So that is a basic straight line scenario using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented historically to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off of that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, and I'll talk about those in a minute. In each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise driven by climate change. Once we had the projection of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of the scenarios. We did that based on agricultural land types, so cropland, pasture land, range land, as well as on land quality, and we'll look at that in the web app. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. The largest one in this case is that we were not able to account for local zoning. Why is that? Because zoning is by definition local. There's no national database of local land use regulations. So at the local level, it's important to know that our maps represent the general pattern and a rough amount of conversion that is likely, not specific locations in which conversion will occur. We were also not able to model the impact of water scarcity. This is not a high issue of concern for Kentucky. We appreciate that, but we know that in other parts of the country it is. So we were not able to map the conversion out of agriculture because of water scarcity or salinization. And we'll again talk just a little bit about that when we look at the data layers in the web app. So let's look at the three scenarios. Here's this first one, business as usual. Again, straight line projections using the 2001 to 2016 data out to 2040. The second is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl gets even worse, which could be driven by high housing costs in urban areas, which we are seeing, and more remote work opportunities, which might be improved as rural broadband improves. We know that in some parts of the country, we may already be on this trajectory towards an even higher rate of sprawl. Lastly, we modeled what we really hoped to see, and that is better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to minimize the impact of needed development on productive agricultural land. So let's take a minute to just look at the assumptions that went into these scenarios. For business as usual, we followed again the historic rate for both urban high density and low density residential conversion. We only adjusted the UHD conversion rate for population growth or decline. We did this because we know that population growth has a strong correlation with urban and highly developed conversion, but it does not have a strong correlation with low density residential conversion. For runaway sprawl, we kept that urban high density projection the same as with the business as usual, but we projected a 50% higher rate of conversion for low density residential development. In the better built city scenario, we modeled a 25% reduction in urban and high density conversion from the business as usual scenario and a 50% reduction in the low density residential conversion from, again, that business as usual scenario. Research has shown that it's possible to reduce the amount of land use for UHD conversion by 25%. We went with a more aggressive 50% on the LDR because there's not that same population density as in urban areas, and we felt that this would be an ambitious but achievable goal. So going to this next chart, this chart shows that each scenario's potential impact. The gray bars show that from 2001 to 2016, what has already been converted. So that's 11 million acres of agricultural land in this century alone. Under business as usual, or worse, runaway sprawl, we may see another 18 or even 24 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. And again, you see there, the dark red is the urban and high density. The orange is the low density residential. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, and as Keith talked about, making agriculture profitable, we could reduce that impact to 11 million acres. So you may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still quite a bit of agricultural land loss. Is that really best case scenario? And AFT feels this. We understand that development is necessary. We understand that there is housing crisis in many parts of this country. What we wanted to do is to recognize that there is and needs to be development, but that we can site it much more smartly. And that was how we arrived at that 11 million. That scenario would be a realistic one. So the next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Kentucky compares to other states. This slide shows the projected total acres of conversion in business as usual. So obviously you see that really dark, almost the really dark brown out in the west. That's because there's a lot of acres of land out there and there is a lot of potential conversion. When you look at the next map, which is projected percent of agricultural land in each county that could be developed, you see a different pattern. And here is one where most of the eastern half of the country turns red because there's lots of conversion in these smaller counties with lower amounts of total agricultural land. So a couple more slides and then we'll turn to the web app. Another key finding relates to the impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that identified land based on its productivity, versatility, and resiliency, or PVR values, and we called that nationally significant land. That is land best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. While this land is concentrated in certain parts of the country, every state has some nationally significant land. What we find in our future projections is the conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all agricultural land, largely for the same reason why it's so productive. It's flat, it's well drained, it tends to not have rocks. Choosing a better built city's future could reduce conversion of nationally significant land by 3.8 million acres compared to business as usual and nearly 7 million acres compared to runaway sprawl. And I think actually with that now we are going to the website, and this here, we are about to explore the web app, and we are being joined by our trusty web app navigator and my colleague Beth Fraser, who you can't see, but she is going to help to navigate us around the web app. So thank you, Beth. So let's dive right in here. When you start, you're going to see this overview, which again, it's a little bit about what we did, what we found. It's a summary document. If you want to get out of that, you just X out of that little X on the upper right there. If you want to look at it again, you can find it in the About tab where Beth has her cursor. Well, now looking up in this corner, again, we're just going to talk through some of these. You'll see a How To tab. This takes you to a 5-minute video that basically talks about what is available in the website and how you can use it. So if you have the time and want to be able to look at that, there's your way to do that. The View Report tab takes you to our Farmland Information Center, which is where you can find the full report, the executive summaries, and again, lots of other resources, including our prior Farms Under Threat reports, including the State of the State reports. We are making our geospatial data layers available to the public. So if you would like them, the Request Data tab is up there as well, and you go to that, as you can see what Beth just showed, to learn more and to make that request. So now Beth is going to take us to Kentucky, and to do that, all you do is click on the state. When you click on it, it will automatically give you the state level information on the left. And as you can see, because Beth's cursor arrived on Hart County, it's showing Hart County on the right. Scrolling down, you'll see on the left the conversion projections on this for each state, and on the right will be the county. So here again, the rust, the very dark rust, is the urban and high density, and the lighter orange is low density residential development. You can see that for the state as a whole, the projection is largely low density residential development. In Warren County, there's a little bit more urban and high density development compared to the state average. So if you scroll down further, there's some numbers that further delineate the likely conversion, including the acres of Kentucky's best land that is likely to be converted, as well as acres by land type. So as you can see, cropland, pasture land, rangeland, woodland. And when you see that woodland, that is not forest land, that is land that is associated with a farm. So it is not all forest land. Many of these statistics are also available in the downloadable state summary. So here, this little blue tab is going to take you to the nifty little report for Kentucky. So as Beth scrolls down, you see that this report includes some analysis of the impacts of conversion. So the number of farms that could be lost under a business as usual projection, and the associated farm output and jobs. These numbers were all derived from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. You'll also see the 3 counties in the state. Go scroll back up for a minute, Beth, that with the highest levels of projected conversion. In a minute, Billy is going to walk us through one of those. So we hope that this summary document will prove useful. We hope that it could be used for many different audiences. We hope that you will share it with your county planners, with your state policymakers, with your federal lawmakers. We believe that this provides a useful and we think pretty compelling rationale for doing more to think about smart growth and to think about farmland protection in Kentucky. So with that, let me turn it back over to Billy, and Billy and Beth are going to walk through a little more data at the county level and take us on a cruise of Kentucky. So Billy, to you.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you, Beth, for navigating us to Warren County, and you've already got the boundary there highlighted. And I just want to go back to something that Chris said a minute ago, where you have the projection of conversion from up to 2040 for Kentucky on the left, and you have the projections for Warren County on the right. And so you see business as usual, runaway sprawl, and better built cities, with better built cities being the ideal there. So Bowling Green is located in Warren County. It's the 3rd largest city in Kentucky. There are 5 interstate interchanges there, and it's been the fastest growing economy, I think, for at least the last 8 years in Kentucky. But you also see there's a lot of productive farmland there. So it is, Beth, if you'll turn on our, on each scenario, the one on the left, we'll do the runaway sprawl scenario. And then on the right, we'll do the better built cities scenario. So as you can see, you know, the urbanized areas are areas that in the dark gray that have grown over time. And if you're familiar with Kentucky, you're probably recognizing some of those outlying cities. But you see the dark gray as the urbanized areas, the lighter gray, which is what developed between 2001 and 2016. But now the red and the orange that we're looking at here, that is what's going to sprawl out between up to 2040. So you can see a pretty big difference with the runaway sprawl and the better built cities. The better built cities is really about having a compact, contiguous urban area surrounded by a productive rural agricultural landscape. And the two really go hand in glove. And, you know, ag is such a big part of Kentucky's overall state economy. It's a huge part. I cannot overstate that. But, you know, smart growth is about identifying the best places for the future expansion of urban areas while still protecting your core agricultural areas. So this is what we want. We want better built cities. And what we're showing here, we would like to see that. That's what we're recommending across the entire state and across the country. So as you can see, there's a big difference between runaway sprawl using 639,000 acres in Kentucky and using runaway sprawl using 34,800 in Warren County. And if you go down to the better built cities, you can see it's a huge reduction. At the state level, it's 249,300 acres, but in Warren County, it's 12,400 acres, almost a third of what is projected in runaway sprawl. So Chris, that's a quick overview, and I know we're going to be talking a little bit more about smart growth in a minute.
Great. Thank you, Billy and Beth, for that. So let me remind everybody that if you have comments or if you have questions, please go to that questions section of the control panel, pop it out using that little box on the right-hand side and type in your question. We'll keep talking for a little bit, but I'll look back and see if there are questions. So let's talk a little bit about what this report has on the policy recommendations. We wanted to use this report to help obviously show the potential threat, but to offer sort of what are things each of us can do. And obviously, one of the things that we can do, but not the only thing, is to engage with policymakers about recommendations. And this can be at the county level, at the state level, at the federal level. So in the report, we have many recommendations. They are, in fact, too many to go through because it's in these 4 categories. And so we encourage you to look at the full report and to think about those recommendations that might be ones that are appropriate for whatever level of engagement you are working on. So one is around encouraging smart growth. The second one is around protecting the agricultural land. Third one is around advancing smart solar siting, which is something that American Farmland Trust and Billy has been working on. And the fourth is supporting farmland access, because again, as Keith mentioned, sort of what are those tools, what are those new needs of getting a next generation onto and successfully onto the land. So as we're looking at policy recommendations, we hope that you will remember back to the State of the States report when we in fact had a state policy scorecard. And we encourage you to go to the Farmland Information Center and remind yourself about that state policy scorecard that looked at the policies in place in Kentucky and in all other 49 states in the following areas. And those, we looked at policies related to purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, of land use planning and growth management, around property tax relief for agricultural land, agricultural district programs, farm link programs, which again are trying to get to that access and transition, and state farmland leasing programs. And so that can give you a good idea of things where we felt, based on the research, that Kentucky was doing a great job in and where Kentucky could do a little bit more. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Billy, and Billy is going to talk a little bit about planning for agriculture and smart growth.
Thanks, Chris. You know, community planning is critically important to smart growth. And as part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. This involves 4 basic principles that can work in tandem with efforts for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our Farmland Information Center website, which is farmlandinfo.org, and we hope you'll check them out. So let me just go into this, these 4 elements, you know, inventorying resources. What are all the resources in your rural areas, your agricultural areas? And these can include not only your best soils, but your blue line streams, your aquifers, your cultural assets, your historic assets, large tree stands, you know, all of those inventory for everything that supports agriculture, including your agricultural infrastructure. What are the infrastructure, the businesses that support the factory floor of agriculture in your community? And then engaging farmers and ranchers. That's critically important in any of these conversations. And quite frankly, in all of the programs and growth discussions that I've been involved in, farmers are not only involved and engaged, they are leading these conversations. They are involved in their county farm bureaus. They are on the planning commission, or they are on the board of adjustment, or they're holding local office driving this conversation. Incorporating agriculture into community plans. So having an agricultural element in your comprehensive plan is critically important to plan for the future of agriculture, and then implementing tools to retain and protect agricultural land. So I'm looking at that image at the far right of this slide, cost of community services. So if you go to farmlandinfo.org and type in cost of community services, you will be able to pull up over 80 cost of community services studies that AFT has done across the nation. And generally, they all say the same thing. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and ag uses less in services than it pays in taxes. And your core commercial or industrial areas are using even less. So the outcome there is that sprawl is not sustainable. It's not sustainable from an agricultural standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, and certainly not from a financial standpoint for communities. It's fiscally, it is unsustainable, because even though ag in your core urban areas are using less in services than they're paying in taxes, they still can't close the gap. So we'll go on to the next slide. Beth, thank you. So what are some of these smart growth strategies? So I'm going to talk about this with a bit of a caveat because only a third of Kentucky counties have planning and zoning. But these are tools that communities that have planning and zoning or communities that don't have planning and zoning can consider as they plan for the future of agriculture, and quite frankly, as they plan for the mirror image of that, your economic development planning for growth around commerce and industry. If you're planning for one, you're planning for the other. So urban growth boundaries, these are tools that are used to define urban areas from rural areas. You typically sewer these areas and provide services across these areas, and everything outside of that boundary is agricultural. It's for farming. And so that boundary in Kentucky, for example, you're going to re-examine that boundary every 5 years as part of your comprehensive plan update process. I grew up in Woodford County. Versailles and Midway have urban growth boundaries. Lexington had the first urban growth boundary in the United States, and the list goes on. Agricultural zoning. So zoning to perpetuate our agricultural industries and our agribusinesses. What does that agricultural zoning look like so that you are not only perpetuating the future of agriculture, but you're allowing the businesses, the industries that support them, being the cattle industry or the equine industry or whatever it may be, to flourish in your rural areas. Large minimum lot sizes in rural or agricultural areas. This will be unique to every county. In Fayette, it's a 40-acre minimum in Fayette County, and it's going to be different. It is different in other counties, and that should be determined by that community of what they feel is the minimum viable agricultural unit. What we don't want is low density residential, the McMansions, or as we say in Kentucky, too much to mow and not enough to grow. We don't want those lots. And, you know, with those, you get a proliferation of septic tank development, which is a whole nother discussion. And then having a viable land trust. Well, we have Bluegrass Land Conservancy, which is in 24 counties in the inner and outer Bluegrass region. And Bluegrass Land Conservancy is actually formally affiliated with American Farmland Trust. And they've been in business since 1995. And we partner together frequently on an ongoing basis. So having a viable land trust, if you're not in the Bluegrass Land Conservancy service area, the PACE program that Keith was talking about earlier, that is our statewide farmland protection program. The PACE program has the ability to purchase easements or to take donated easements. And funding is always a question for be it the Fayette County Purchase of Development Rights Program or the state PACE program. We don't have to go into that now, but there are federal farmland protection programs that allow funding to be used with a variety of local matches, which is a conversation for another call, which would enable the state PACE program or Bluegrass Land Conservancy or Lexington's PDR program to conserve more farmland. And then having a goal for permanent farmland protection in the comprehensive plan. Critically important. Just starting with that goal, it gives you something to work for. And part of your inventory is you're going to be looking at how many acres you have that are currently conserved in your county, maybe more than you know, as you work toward that goal. The other part about having a goal for permanent farmland protection, it lets the community or the development side of this conversation realize that you're not taking all of the land. You're just taking enough land to make sure that farming and agriculture can be sustained in the future. And our cost of community services studies bear out that while there's a goal for farmland protection, that doesn't automatically mean that the rest of that land is going to be developed in some non-agricultural way, because quite simply, it's not economically viable. So that's part of that larger conversation about comprehensive planning. Chris, I think that sums it up in terms of the comments I was going to make on smart growth strategies.
Great. Thank you so much, Billy. That was super helpful. So, and I know, Keith, that you mentioned that you had to leave. So if you drop off, we understand. We appreciate you being on. Any last thoughts before you do?
I'll just thank you all very much. It's been very helpful, this presentation and the information that you all have provided today and in the past. And the Department of Ag and Commissioner Quarles and I continue to look forward to working with you all. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Keith. So I'm not seeing any questions. So let's just talk a little bit about resources that are available. This is, in fact, the last slide, but please do feel free to type in any questions or comments. I want to talk about a couple of resources that we've both mentioned. First, the Farmland Information Center, or what we call the FIC at American Farmland Trust, has been around for quite a long time. It is a partnership with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service, and they are a wealth of information. Not only can you find these kinds of reports, the cost of community services reports that Billy mentioned, but there are significant resources around how to protect your farmland if you are a landowner or a farmer, with sort of explaining the process of either donating an easement. What is an agricultural conservation easement? There is sections around farmland access. There are resources around soil conservation and soil health. It is really a wealth of information, and conveniently there is a telephone number that if you have a question, you can call, not just email. So people do answer the phone there. And I just highly recommend that people take a cruise through the FIC, because it is really a wealth of information, both for individual landowners and for those who are academics and doing their own research, as well as those practitioners and, again, citizen advocates looking for suggestions and information to make the case for saving farm and ranch land. The second thing that I want to talk about a little bit is the National Agricultural Land Network, and that is what I direct, and Beth, who has been giving us the cruise of the website, is the network manager. Again, we created this in 2020 as one of AFT's responses to farms under threat, feeling that we needed a way to help engage and connect folks working around the country to save farmland, whether that's through permanent protection or any number of other tools that can be used to keep the agricultural land base intact. We encourage anybody who is on this webinar to become a member. It is very convenient in that it is free. Beth will put the information on the network into the chat so that you will have a link directly to it. We have informational webinars such as this. We have smaller regional roundtables. We are always open to new and different programming, and we are looking, as we move forward with this report, in working more with smart growth partners to do some more specific planning for agriculture and smart growth strategy sessions. So we encourage folks to join the network. We hope you will. We'll hope you take a look at it. And I think, Billy, that since we don't have any questions, I'll turn it back to you for the last wrap up.
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank everyone that has joined us today. These are very important conversations as we plan for the future of agriculture in Kentucky and across this nation. I encourage you to access AFT's website at farmland.org, our farmland information website, as Chris mentioned, with the website here on the slide, and to engage with our organization and ask questions. We do have full-time staff in Kentucky in a Louisville office, and we welcome the opportunity to work with anyone that's on this call. And looking forward to continuing these conversations. Chris will be doing these webinars across the nation. I'm hosting a number of them with her, and just encourage you to engage in your community. And I spoke to a group in Florida and then one recently in Lexington, but engaging in your community, get yourself appointed to your local planning commission. Get yourself appointed to the Board of Adjustment. Serving on those two boards in your community is the next most powerful thing you can do for the future of agriculture, and quite frankly, for the future of your community, other than being elected to office. You can have an impact on what your community looks like for generations to come. And I encourage everyone here to get involved in this conversation, either as an activist or as an advocate, as a volunteer. And we, of course, welcome all of you to become members of American Farmland Trust.
Great. Thank you so much, Billy. Thank you all for joining us. This recording has been recorded. You all receive a copy of the recording. We encourage you to share it with all of your friends, colleagues, family, etc. So with that, have a great afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.